The third voice of this monster is my favorite part of the whole sound. It's going to introduce us to the wild universe of random voltages and probability, as well as using acoustic samples in our electronic music. So let's have a look at it and hear what it sounds like. So you know how back in voice 1 I said 8-note loops are getting boring? So wow, can we turn this into a 24-note loop? Well, this voice eliminates the idea of a loop altogether. Instead, it sends random voltages to the quantizer, which means we have an endless set of notes in a non-repeating pattern. Is non-repeating pattern an oxymoron? I think so. But I don't know how else to phrase that. The quantizer rounds the random voltages to one of our scale degrees, then spits it to the volts per octave input of a sampler. So open up your VCV session from voice 2 and let's get started. To begin with, we're going to need more inputs than the VCA mix module can provide. So this is the perfect time to introduce you to the Mind Meld Mix Junior. It's a free mixer that has 8 stereo inputs and an expander for effects that we will get to later. So download it, put it in your rack. And let's start by moving the left and right outputs from voice 1 over to the left-right inputs on the mixer's channel 1. Then do the same thing with voice 2. Just like so. And now we're going to connect. We can disconnect our VCA mix module entirely. In fact, I'm just going to delete it. And we can connect these main outputs of the mixer right here to the audio inputs, to the audio inputs of our audio module. There's left. There's right. And now we have the ability to mix voice 1, voice 2, turn one up as loud or as soft as we would like. And we can even pan them a little left and right, which gives for a nice separation to the sound. We're also going to need the Sicko sampler manufactured by Sickazel. Now they make a bunch of different versions of this and they are all ugly, but it works great and has some excellent features that are hard to find with anything else. So let's come over here and with a right click, we're choosing this Sicko sampler from Sickazel. And where are we going to build this? Let's build this to the left, or to the right of our new mixer that we just put in. Now, when it comes to samplers, the first thing you need is a sample. If you're using it for a melodic sound like we are, it helps if the sample was recorded playing the note C, since that is the assumed root note for our quantizer. So for this, I recorded a violin plucking one of the strings in C and a piano playing a high C note. I have included those as well as a few other samples in a zip file called Things in C that I uploaded to our class content. You can choose whichever you like for your session, or get adventurous and decide to record your own. Right-clicking on the sampler will give you the option to load your sample, and that will just open up a browser or a file explorer on Windows, a Finder window on a Mac. Here we go, and where is Things in C? Things in C. So we'll start with the violin pluck that I put here. We will connect the left and right outputs of the sampler to the next channel in our mixer. Okay, great. Now it's time to get random. So VCV offers two different random voltage generating modules, and we're going to use both. But we're going to begin with one called RND. However, apparently I have to type in the whole word random and then just choose RND. Good to know. And I'm going to stick that right just in between my mixer and my sampler somewhere. And we also need another copy of our quantizer, so select yours that you already have and use that Command D or Control D to duplicate it. That way you don't have to reset the scale. Bring that over here as well. Connect the output of the quantizer that already has your scale notes selected to the volts per octave input on the sampler, which in this case is just labeled V.O. And connect the first random output to the volts per octave input on our quantizer. At this point, if you click the push button on random, it will send a random pitch voltage to the quantizer, and the quantizer will send it to the sampler. I don't know if you could hear that through your speakers, but that was a very, very high pluck. If we wanted to, we could use rescale like we did in our last two voices to narrow that pitch range to 2 octaves, but RND makes it easier than that for us. Right-clicking on the module brings up a menu, and at the very bottom, you will see that it says Random Range, and we can select -1 volt to +1 volt. 2 volts, 2 octaves. Push it again, and you hear. Each time I push the random button, it changes the pitch at which our sample plays. So we just need something to trigger that random module so we don't have to manually push the button. And it would be great if the trigger stays in tempo with the rest of our patch. Well, right now our tempo is being controlled by the clock of the sequencer, but that clock's running at a really slow tempo, and I want something faster for this rhythm. So here is where we get to experiment with what we call a clock multiplier. Once again, there are plenty of dedicated modules to multiply clock speeds, but sticking with our VCV brand, we're going to use an LFO to do this. So send the clock out of your sequencer to the clock in of the LFO. Let me find the output of my sequencer here. It's way over here. Clock output. This is a green cable for clocks. We're going to send that to the input. Scrolling of our LFO. The clock input. There we go. And now you'll notice that the frequency knob, instead of showing us a frequency in hertz, the frequency knob of our LFO just says 1x, meaning it is 1 times the clock speed. So we can change that, and I'm going to choose a multiple that isn't exactly a duple of the original. I'm going to multiply this by ×7. And then we can take the square output of our LFO, which is now a clock signal, and send that to the trigger of random. And at this point, if we listen, can you hear that? Let me turn up my audio module a little bit for you. Every time the pitch changes, it is changing, or every time the clock hits, it is changing the pitch that comes out of our quantizer, but it always stays within the notes that we've selected on our quantizer here. So if we just set this, by the way, our trigger input on sampler here, it just says play. So if I just set that same clock, the same trigger that I was using to trigger random, to also trigger play, it will sound like this. Which I suppose is Well, it's one thing or another. I don't know if I like it. It's definitely so steady and repetitive that it might get boring. Let's turn that down just a little. And this is where we get to introduce the concept of probability to all of this. This is where it kind of gets fun for me. Probability will take the steady pulse that we send in and only output the trigger at random based on a percentage of chance that we will enter. Now, I know I keep saying this, but there are dedicated modules to do only probability, but VCV gave us a deeply versatile module called random. Once again, let's type in random here. And instead of choosing RND this time, we're going to choose the actual module called random. And all we're going to worry about, we're going to ignore most of the inputs and outputs here and just worry about trigger in and trigger out. Right now, if you look, you'll see my probability is set to 100%, meaning it's always going to output that trigger. The lower I take this, the less chance it's going to output a trigger for each hit. Let's experiment. Let me turn this up just a little bit for us. Now you hear we have those kind of like note tails, like you can tell that even though it's not triggering, we're still hearing the pitch change. If you really wanted to, I kind of like that. I'm gonna leave it, but if you really wanted to, you could use the dedicated ADSR on the sampler here to slow this way down, and no, that's not even gonna fix the problem. So we might actually need to live with it for now. There are ways around it. We could use something that we have not talked about called sample and hold to fix this. But for now, we're going to leave it. I kind of like those. Yeah, we're going to leave it, I think. Just turn my sustain all the way up. And so now it's making this unique, non-repetitive rhythm in our patch. Let's hear that with the other voices for a second. Go. So what I did in my patch previously was just kind of duplicated the random module and the sampler. So now I have two of each. Set this up the same way, but changed the sample in number 2. Let me turn that down. So in sampler number 2, I loaded a different sample. I loaded piano in this case. Let's see here. Velasco, upright, C7. Open that. Sent those outputs to the next module, or the next channel of my mixer. There's my piano. And I used a really low probability for this one so that you just only occasionally heard the piano, but we're going to trigger the probability with the same trigger. Like that. I did one other thing in my patch that I'm actually not going to replicate here. I don't want you to have to worry about it. Let's turn this all down just a little bit. I did one other thing in my patch, and that was I used a Logic module to make sure that the violin and piano never played simultaneously. But I don't think we need to. I think just trying to wrap your brain around random voltages, random triggers, and a clock multiplier is enough for this voice. Or technically, these two voices. And you know what? I've lost my volts per octave on the piano. Let's take that back to quantizer here. There you go. All right, well, this has been fun. Hopefully you were able to follow along with most of that. Until next time, Scotty Vico fading out.
Let's go!